back, everyone. I hope you had a nice lunch and chat. We're now going to go into the second half of the afternoon, and we're very lucky to have Claudio here to talk to us. So, Claudio, take it away.
Hey, guys. How are you? So, a few years ago, I decided I could draw, or at least I could learn to draw, right? So because of that, I don't believe in fixed talents. We can always develop ourselves, I guess. And so I decided I could draw. And so now I got to have my own avatar. And apparently, the older I become, the younger the avatar is becoming. But, that's something that happens. So let me introduce this avatar to you, OK? So this is Jim. He wants to get things done, grow, be part of a high-performance team. Jim would like to change the world, but the world does not want to be changed. So today, this is Jim, right? And I don't know how many of them do you meet. Maybe some of you are Jim, right? Certainly, I feel at some point I was like that. Can we do something about this? So do you remember, for the guys who work in software, right, as architects maybe, okay, somebody, the days, what it was like before continuous integration went to mainstream, right? I worked on those projects multi-years. At the end of, a really long amount of work, then we would end up integrating, right? Up to then, we were all on track according to the plan. Project manager was happy. Then we started integrating, and of course, we introduced a lot of bugs for months, right? And then you put them together, and of course, it's a bloodbath, right? So literally, you try to get things together, and it's hard to essentially to schedule when you can release. I work with projects where the manager could not look at me in the eyes. He would look at his shoes and say, "We will never go live. We will never go live. We will never go live." Okay? So do you remember that? So here's the thing, right? We treat change sort of the same way, right? We treat change as a big, scary thing. But what if, instead, we could evolve fast, almost as fast as a virus? I learned that there are some viruses or some bacteria, microorganisms anyway, who evolve every 15 minutes. Every 15 minutes, there's a new generation. And obviously, a lot of this is mutation. Some of it is actually improvement. And it turns out that they become very resilient to any drug that you would introduce, right? Because they keep evolving. And so I started really with this kind of mindset. Can we actually change fast? I'm not saying every 15 minutes, but really fast. And so here's my thought. And the thought is, as Gar was introducing before, if change is hard, make it continuous. If change is hard, make it continuous. And I actually started thinking about, I don't know if you're into Agile. I've been doing Agile development since 2001. And I remember the times where Kent Beck was actually using the metaphor for extreme programming of pulling the knobs to 10 and actually see what happens then, if we go to that kind of level of being extreme, I guess. Right? And that's what I have in mind. Well, that's it. I'm done. This is the only thing you should remember. Right? I can go. That's it. But then what happens is, trying to rewire the human brain is kind of difficult. And as a member, actually, as a fellow of the Lean Systems Society, we have this kind of goal of improving the world by changing the systems. It's not by changing the behavior of people. It's actually looking at the systems on which people operate and modify those. So from the change point of view, I wonder, can we act on the system, that is the environment in this case, in which decisions are made, so that continuous evolution can emerge? Okay? So I have in mind continuous evolution. How can we architect change so that people start to evolve? So welcome to this kind of idea of architecting change with popcorn flow. Okay, so to explain how this works, let me introduce a story. And the story goes like that. A while ago, I worked with a team who had not deployed in months. And we had this motto, which is a motto that comes from Toyota. I've done a lot of Lean, I guess. And the motto is pretty much hard on systems, soft on people. Because effectively what happens is Alistair, you and me, we could have different level of performance. But if we work in the same office, in the same area, we are kind of constrained by the environment, the system that we are in, effectively. So our performance is really relative to the bureaucracy, the processes, everything that goes there. So rather than actually acting on our differences, that's really 5% maybe. Let's work on the 95%, with everything else that pretty much worked against us or for us in a way or the other. That's the idea of continuous improvement, I guess, in Toyota, right? But so we had this motto in mind, and we worked together, and we evolved using a method, which is kind of a lean and agile method called Kanban, right? It's about really evolution. But then the problem is that the Kanban board captured what I would call the value stream. This is what we call in lean, right? Is effectively how you make money, right? The features as they go through, the bricks you build, whatever you're building, the widgets you build, whatever. That's how you make money, is how you create value. You can absolutely map all of it. But that somewhat is the outcome of our thinking. What do I mean by that is a story within the story, another time, another place. A journalist goes to the Toyota plants and talks to a manager and says, why do you allow all your competitors to copy all your tools? So we go there, we copy Kanban, value stream mapping, 5S's, whatever. And the manager says, what they need to see is not visible. What the hell is he talking about? What he's talking about is perhaps this. That is not what you do, but rather what you learn by doing it that matters. Okay? It's not what you do, what you learn by doing it that matters. The thing I never write, but is also true, is that and then it's not what you learn, but what you do with what you learn that matters, right? It's a cycle. Okay, just understand. Okay, anyway, the real secret for us was our rapid stream of traceable change experiments, which we built through steps. And the steps goes in this way. We start with problems and observations. So we were looking at the board, for example. We saw some problems, impediments to flow, or other problems that you may have in your organization. Whatever that is, we had these steps, right? Problems and observations. Goes to options, possible experiments, committed, ongoing, review, next. Of course, I'm going to explain them, but these are essentially the steps that we go through. And it turns out that the initials of each step make the word popcorn, hence the name popcorn flow. Okay? So let's see this at work. So we captured our learning journey on a parallel popcorn board. Some people have it electronic, some people have it physical, right? But in this case, it's electronic. It doesn't matter. And you could start with something as simple as the problem is that the quality of our code sucks, right? Now, if I wrote it in this way, as you see, it's kind of an opinionated opinion, right? You could maybe presume that somebody within the team may actually resist it. It's not necessarily a fact, right? If I say maybe the customer finds 3 bugs every single week, that's a factual. That's an observation, it's a fact, and I can actually say, is it a problem in the first place? If I say the code sucks, well, certainly I'm having an opinion about this, and I expect, though, that it might be challenged. But the thing is, I want to instill Kaizen urgency. Kaizen means continuous improvement. Creating this urgency there, rather than assuming that we have the perfect system, let's assume the opposite. We have a system that we can continuously improve. So let's create urgency around this, okay? And so because of that, I'm actually happy to make progress even with imperfect information. So rather than spending a lot of time on thoroughly analyzing the data, there is actually a methodology called A3 thinking that comes from Toyota. And with that one, I actually build a product around that. It's about actually we put the investigator's hat. We do proper analysis. We look at all the data. We see the gap between expectation and reality. We set a target. So we frame the problem. We do root cause analysis. And that can take a lot of time, then countermeasures and so on. It works in certain environments, certainly in the complicated domain. It's really useful, okay? But it takes a lot of time. But in this case, it's kind of heresy, right? I'm kind of looking at the mindset, you know what? Even if we don't have all the data, I'm fine with that. So I'm happy to make progress even with imperfect information, and as a consequence, everybody is entitled to their own opinion, but a shared opinion is a fact. And this is another popcorn flow principle, okay? How does it translate this principle in practice? It works in this way. I may be a member of the team. I may be an external consultant just parachuted in the team, having their own opinions. But I want to let myself to actually show that I'm making some observations, and I'm allowed to do that. I'm entitled to those opinions. However, and so I write it down. I write a ticket in my board, problems and observations. The code sucks, and I put my icon there. But you know what? If we discuss it within the team and we all agree, the shared opinion is a fact. So I cross it, or I take the icon out. Okay? This is really to have that kind of urgency of small problems we identify. Okay, let's do something about that. Let's not waste a lot of time. The thing is, because I want to be continuous. I want to do that often. Small, traceable experiments and so on. Okay, so once we move to that, I use these shared observations to create illicit options. And I use the rule of three. Virginia Satir actually introduced this idea, which has been picked up. But anyways, the rule of three essentially says, if you have one option, you have no option. If you have two, you have a dilemma. Three or more, you have a world of possibilities. So I'm shooting for actually saying, we have a problem, what options do we have? Okay? I was doing a keynote in Israel in January. After the keynote, I was talking to a lawyer for a large firm, for the government actually, but large firm. And she said, I have managers reporting to me, and I have a problem with one manager, but I know exactly the solution. And I said, you know what? You talk exactly like my son. What options do you have? You know, we have a problem and a solution, right? It's almost automatic. Think about options. What are we talking about here? Okay? So we think about broadening at that point our divergent thinking. And but then again, you know, like options are sort of like directions, if you want. Like we could go this way or we could go that way. And promising options, so lead to a backlog of possible experiments. So to keep it in software, if the problem is that the code sucks, what options do we have? Test-driven development, continuous integration. Now, the problem is not we lack continuous integration, because here we're masking a problem for a solution that we have in mind. If I write the problem as we lack continuous integration, I have no options but to do continuous integration, right? So there's something that is smelly there, right? So we look back and say, hold on, continuous integration is solving some problem. What problem is it solving? And is that the actual problem? And based on the problem, what options do we have? So I'm talking about, I don't know, continuous integration, test-driven development, pair programming. You know, if you try to do something like pair programming, and you introduce it to the team, and you say, from now on, until death will separate us, we are going to do pair programming. You may not, but you may possibly encounter some what we call resistance to change, right? So, yeah, it's almost automatic. The thing is, it's not resistance to change, it's reaction to change. What we're talking about here is to actually apply lean startup to organizational change, and the theory and the territory of extreme uncertainty is how people react to change. We could have a small idea, people react in different ways. I can't predict that. It depends on your background. Yeah? Some people are, oh yeah, let's do that. And others would say, well, no, wait a second, I don't want to do that at all. So what do we do instead is we propose it as an option, and then we do a little experiment. What's a possible experiment for pair programming? As I said before, rather than say, let's do this from now on until death will separate us, how about me and you, for the next 3 days, we are going to do pair programming. But let's make it an experiment, right? Let's not just try and see what happens. An experiment with something like the action, and then we have an expectation. And the expectation may be as simple as, let's write down that I like it, you like it. Our perception is that at the end of the 3 days, our code is better, and that we will want to continue doing that moving forward. Okay? So it's actually, I can test that. I can do the 3 days together and validate that. Okay? So we write expectations that in many ways, very often, like what is impeding working in this kind of systems is, but we need to have like metrics, like, Paddy, you were asking before, right, the kind of metric that you would look at. Those are trailing indicators. So those are indicators that we will know the value of removing the dependencies maybe a long time after, right? But if you have leading indicators or qualitative indicators that actually say, you know what, at the end of that, let's agree that we like it. It's fine. Why? Because the enemy is inertia. Most of us don't change, right? We live in a world of change, and we pretend we can't change. So the thing is, let's make a little bit of increment. Yeah? So like in this case, which is typical, I guess, of a kind of early days kind of Kanban team, is more like, let's add explicit work in progress limits to the board, if you're familiar with Kanban. But anyways, there is a reason there, which is effectively the link back to the problem. So we had a problem, we generated a number of options, and we said, okay, one option we can exercise with a little experiment is this one. Let's try to limit how much work we take effectively, and because there are lean theories behind that and whatever, and the expectation is that the work will be smoother, and we get at the end of the sprint without having pretty much work, partially done work accumulating at the end, right? So that testers need to work overtime, or we don't have time to do testing and whatever, all that kind of stuff. So as you see, this is kind of just a little experiment. It felt safe, right? At the end of that, I can validate this. And I never say, if it doesn't work, let's go back. If it doesn't work, let's revisit it. Because we already introduced something in the system. It's new. We are new. We learned something. Okay? So it's really to understand this kind of approach. So let me show some experiments again. So we have this kind of fix as you go. These are real experiments, right? If there is one thing, this didn't come from theory or whatever, it came from practice, okay, to actually applying this stuff. So in this case, like, if we find small bugs, let's just fix them, yeah? And in this case, for this team, it came at a particular point in time where they had traditional developers in a team and new developers coming in, right? So new blood, and the new blood was a little bit more aggressive, and the other ones were way more conservative. So you can imagine the fight of actually saying, rather than going through like a lot of triage, if we actually find simple problems, let's just fix them. Let's just go for it. Now, if you start this is a cultural clash effectively, right? So if we make that as a big, from now on, this is the way we do it, it's a big deal. But in this case, it was a limited amount of time, okay, with an expectation and everything. So they run the experiment. Let's fast forward a few weeks, if not months later. There was another one, which is, let's pair on just-in-time analysis. What's the reason? Again, we're moving towards just-in-time analysis to reduce sprint planning and moving to continuous flow. They got into this idea of the Kanban sort of continuous flow of work rather than why do we have sprints? Why do we do a lot of planning up front? Can we avoid to do that? So let's just agree then when there's something to work, when I'm ready to work, I have actually the product owner or product manager there. Let's talk just in time. Let's not pile up stuff, okay? So that, again, is the next experiment that they did just a few weeks later. And this is, again, a couple of weeks later was, let's do the analytics meetup to show how analytics works with the new Kanban tool. So you can actually see the journey that this team actually went through, right? In this particular case, was more to say, rather than spending a lot of time on the traditional point estimation and all that kind of stuff, let's use the no estimate approach. Have you ever heard of it? Essentially, why do we estimate if statistically we can actually see how much we produce, right? If every story is stories, shift from 1 to 8 points, the middle is 4. Let's give 4 to everything as an average. You will essentially count them, right? But it turns out it may or may not apply to you. All I say is, let's check the data, what the expectation was and what actually the reality is. We can actually see over time if what the data is telling us is close to our expectations. But anyways, that's not the point. The point is that people who actually try, developers particularly, actually say, estimates suck. It's a lot of waste and whatever. So from now on, no estimate. And then obviously you have other roles that actually say, well, I need to have some form of predictability. No, we do no estimates. That's it. Now, the no estimate doesn't actually mean you don't do estimates, right? But you actually use maybe something where you understand the estimate is to reach a form of predictability. So the question is, are other ways to actually to get that predictability without maybe investing a lot of time on estimates, okay? So, but this is beside the point. The point here is that in a very mature way, even for something like a simple meeting, they set up a mature way, I guess, to move towards like this kind of continuous flow, okay? Through experiments again. So at each retrospective, and this is kind of important, some teams actually do it just in time, and others do it through weekly retrospectives. So with the assumption that we are doing weekly retrospectives, at each retrospective, this is what I ask. And it's a kata, it's a routine. It always happens. People know it will happen. Those are the questions. What experiments did we decide to do? Which ones did we actually do? What was their expectation? What's reality? Now we have a gap between expectation and reality. What did we learn? Yeah, and based on what we learned, what are we going to do next? As you see, I didn't have to read the slides. I know it because I've done it a million times. And that's the reason is a kata, is a routine. We know it happens. Not only we set up the expectations, there is a mechanism pretty much to review these expectations. Now what happens is, you can do it I suggest you do it on a weekly basis, or better, or more often, right? Because effectively what happens is, if you wait for a long time to the next one, then you have a pile of experiments, pile of problems, everything accumulates. And what we really want is this continuous flow, right? So some teams do it just in time. What I always do just in time is to introduce problems. As I see a problem, write it down. As I see a problem, I may think about one or two options, and then elicit others, right, to introduce their own. I never start with me saying, this is the problem and this is a solution. It could be, this is a problem and this is one way to actually address it. But very often, I actually wait for others to come up with ideas, right? And then, of course, you know, I'm a consultant. Typically, what I say is that consultants, what they do is they bring models, experience, and options. Right? Sometimes you have the options internally, sometimes you need to buy them. Sometimes you can't see problems, so you need to help people actually to see them, right? And this is where models actually help you. You know, if the goal is to have this kind of continuous flow, then you know what are the impediments to that. You start seeing the impediments to this flow. Okay, anyway, so the important thing is this, right? So we have this routine, and as I say, we introduce things just in time. And typically what I also say is problems and options are like mozzarellas. Yeah, I'm Italian, so I have to use that metaphor. Mozzarellas have an expiry date. They take real estate. It's like Manhattan. You know, like, I don't want them like forever. So we generate options. We run experiments now. I keep all the experiments. I want to keep trace of those experiments. And the reason is that's the learning stream. This is what people reason about. You can actually see a throughput of experiments. I can actually tell you if a team, an indicator, if a team is agile. Right? It's not about are they going fast. Agile is certainly not about, well, Agile is not Scrum. Scrum is not Agile, right? Certainly Agile is not about compliance to certain routines, unless are these ones, right? But it's definitely not. It's not the number of stand-up meetings. It's not the opinion of any consultant that comes there and says, yeah, that team is mature, right? It's nothing like that. We kind of lost in the way of processes what actually Agile is all about. It's about continuous evolution, right? So some people actually say this is the next big idea in Lean and Agile. And I believe them, right? Because it's really like to understand what Agile is all about, and based on that, what are we going to do, rather than just mindlessly following certain routines. I'm not saying they are useless. It's just that if you're doing that in that way and believe you're Agile, well, probably you're not where you could be, I guess. Talking also about transitions, because we talked about big change and small change. You don't transition to Agile, right? There isn't an end state on Agile. It's a continuous journey, right? So the thing is, how do we evolve to get there? Okay, anyway, so, yeah, you know, we set an expectation, and then we may fail. You know, some people really are afraid of that, right? So they fear failure. They look at this and they say, well, the gap between expectation and reality leads to frustration. But what I say really is that we really fail when we don't set expectations, right? Because we are effectively denying ourselves an opportunity to learn. The gap between reality and expectation is what I call learning. So, inertia is our enemy. I kind of mentioned that before. So in popcorn flow, any change is good change. Is exactly like the viruses or the bacteria I was talking about. Not all change leads to improvement, but yet improvement without change is impossible. So think about that as mutation. The thing is, what you're doing is experiments that in complexity theory, you would call them as coherent. That is, we have in mind that if we do them, we should improve. Some of them meet our expectations, some don't meet our expectations. Right? In my own personal life, I'm using it at personal level. 40% of my experiments fail to meet my own expectation. All of them I have something to learn about, or most of them. Okay? In fact, when I started introducing that not only to software development, but for sales, we run some experiments, and they all passed, and they were all happy. And I said, oh, I'm not happy. We need to fail on something, for God's sake, right? Because if we constantly meet our expectations, maybe we are not pushing ourselves enough. We did what we knew already would work, which is already something, right? But it's actually when we don't meet our expectations that you start thinking, why did that happen? We ask questions for ourselves. Okay, that's the learning. So it's not fail fast, fail often. It's learn fast, learn often. I bought a skateboard to my son. He's 5 years old, almost 6 now. Can you actually pretend that you will never fall? Right? So I watched some videos. I'm actually going to buy a skateboard myself. I'm 47. I already have a broken knee. I'll try. Fuck it. You know? But the thing is, right, can you actually fake it? Can you become good if you do skateboard? You are going to fail. So maybe let's think about ourselves. That's the way we're riding our life, okay? We're on a skateboard all the time. People who are afraid to fail are the ones who will never progress in their life, or will have a hard time to progress in their life. And I have something to add to this. Right from the beginning, I knew this was different because the team could easily handle 5 to 10 change experiments every single week. You know, at the beginning it's hard. You design an experiment, you don't know how to run it. They're bigger, clunky, this and that. But it is like heating kernels, popcorn kernels, right? At the beginning you have one pop and then suddenly bam, 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 bam. This is my observation I see over and over with different teams in different companies. And in this particular case, it actually ended up enabling them to deliver multiple times a day. So from not delivery in months to delivering several times a day, all through a very visible stream of experiments. The CEO came to me and said, how is this team doing? I just pointed at the board and said, look at this. There's 5 to 10 experiments every week. What do you think? Yeah? So in many cases, what you would see is that the team over there may be perceived as, and maybe it's real, maybe goes faster. But these guys are continuously learning and evolving. So I know for sure these guys are agile. They're really into the continuous improvement mindset. And they will outperform these other guys if you could actually have comparative ways. But it's a very visual, practical indicator of actually say, God, I'm learning. This team is learning. In this project, we are learning. Okay? So this is what happened to this team. And then it spread. Yeah? You see, I call this actually terraforming. Yeah, terraforming organizations. It's like, you know, Schwarzenegger, when he put the hand there and all the oxygen came out. These are popcorns. These are all experiments, right, coming up throughout the organization. And because it applied to software, but there's nothing specific to software here, right? We're talking about problems. Everybody's got healthcare. They would have problems. I was talking about lawyers. I'm talking about other examples I'll show you in a minute. But this is the idea. Now we have, like, projects where popcorn flow is used at different levels, you know, at teams levels, and then there's a large telecom project, and they're using it at problem level. It's actually a communication platform from them across countries. That's the way they address their problems. They think about options, and they run experiments, and they move. Okay, so So imagine really like a continuous flow of experiments to dramatically accelerate the rate of change in every corner of your organization. How far would you go? Yeah? Every corner. So today, Popcorn Flow is entering more organizations. And some I can name, I guess, and some I can't. But anyways, it doesn't matter. The point being is it is actually going at a different level. In this case, for example, that's the Kanban board. That's the value stream. And this is the Popcorn Flow board, right? As they set it up, they actually realized, you know, rather than having, as I normally see, like 2 separate boards, they actually had the same. And they do the just-in-time improvements here. They see problems, they improve, they put the problems there. If there's an expiry date there, they take 5 minutes after the stand-up, and they do that all the time. Yeah, it's just continuous. And they were laughing and thinking, maybe we should actually have that 80% high, because it's more important than the actual I don't know about that. But in any case, like it really shows this idea that it's like rails in a ladder. Yeah? You need one and the other to make progress. One is the value stream, the other one is the learning stream. Okay, so here's the other thing, like is touching lives even outside the business world. And it happened to me in the past with A3 Thinker, this stack of cards. In the past, like I created this problem-solving cards. I actually have some with me. But in that case, it was about process improvement. As I was saying, like it's about this kind of relentless investigation, where you go outside even your circle of influence. Maybe you're talking to departments or breaking policies in different countries, because essentially you capture the story of a problem as it develops on just a piece of A3, right? And you don't write it all. You start with the background where you think in terms of what's the consequence of not doing this. You know, we have a 20 million project. You know, I was working on a project where, you know, there's a 20 million project worth of, you know, whatever. And the last mile, which is to bring software live, it would take 9 months. No matter what the development teams do, to go live is 9 months. And this is because there are policies, bureaucracy, servers in a different country. You can imagine, you know, all those kind of issues that are actually quite common. I see that often enough. And I say, well, you know, policies are being created by humans, and by humans shall be destroyed if they don't serve the purpose anymore, right? So you would start actually looking at the consequences and say, well, who's going to scream if this project failed? Forget IT, from the business point of view, who asked for it? You know, and you go to this person, you say, this is the way I see the problem. Right? So, but that would be the A3 thinking, Toyota, deliberate, systematic kind of way of looking at things. And but with that project, what happened was not only did it for process improvement, but then I realized, wow, like people are using it for other things. I talked to activists in South Africa, North America, using it for, you know, dealing with problems like poverty and racism and whatever. And I came to this realization, and the realization is that all my life I've been doing I've been a craftsman, right? Is you work on your code, you do stuff as well as you can. And then at some point I realized the difference between being a perfectionist and being an achiever, right? And then I switched into another mindset. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, and they can somewhat coexist, but it was in the idea of the entrepreneur. Somebody's problem is somebody else's opportunity, right? The problem-solving sort of view. But with this, I started actually looking into this idea of activism by invention. Essentially this idea that what we create, what we can make a difference and can help others change the world, okay? So I had a brief aspect of this in a previous product, and this is what's happening with Popcorn Flow now. So Popcorn Flow is entering families. This is my son. Right? He was 5. He is now almost 6. And at some point, he would wake up at night and say, the problem is. And we talk about options. And we talk about experiments. Just last week, he found an acorn. Yeah? An acorn? So his problem was, and he wants to play this game. So his problem was that the acorn should become a tree. How do I plant the acorn to make it as a tree? And I said, okay, excellent. Draw it. That's what it does. It doesn't write, it wrote. So the tree, the acorn, and the question mark. And so based on that, what options do we have? So the options were phone a friend. We have a friend who's good in gardening, and she could tell us anything there is to it, like to do that. We can just do it. I mean, I can dig a hole, just throw it and pray, just maybe put some water. We could, Mommy actually suggested, how about we go to the library, we get the book. But he came with another one that may surprise you, which was, let's Google it. Okay. So, okay, let's write it as an experiment. My expectation is that if we Google it, we'll find at least one video, and the video will tell us how to plant this, and we will be able to plant it and move forward. I wrote it down, the expectations, right? And what we realized is that we did it, and the video actually not only told how to do it, but actually told us that that bloody acorn wasn't good at all. And the way to try it is pretty much to put the acorn, here's the rule, right? Put the acorn in a glass of water. If it floats, it's not good, right? Because maybe a bug ate it, maybe actually was slightly cracked and whatever. So my son, like many of us, we failed an experiment, right? And he was very upset. Oh, my acorn, I found it in Malahide Castle, And I said, but here's the thing. This is what we learned, right? We learned very quickly how to find out. So the next step is, what are we going to do next? What are we going to do next? We're going to Malahide Castle with a glass of water, right? So this is an example of where don't be too upset if we fail. It's like skateboarding, right? So what? You can break your knee, but, So, but here's the other thing. So it's impacting certain families. I know of other families are using it. Are you using it? Okay, cool. And, but also schools. And soon even autism support groups. One thing I didn't say is that my son is actually autistic. Super intelligent, but he's Asperger, right? What it means is that essentially needs to be in control of everything. He's the perfect project manager, right? He works well with things, not so well with people, right? So in social interactions, it is a problem. But I'm experimenting with him, right? So the very first time we did an experiment was toys on the floor, and we negotiated the idea that he took the toy, put it in the box, because the other options were horrific, like let's throw it on the bin, let's give it to another kid, which is even worse, stuff like that. And he said, okay, what option do you want to exercise, Matteo? Okay, I'll put the toy in the box, and he did. And my wife looked at me and says, what just happened? That's the thing, right? You're negotiating change very easily. So I brought it to his teacher, who's the vice principal of the school, who loved it. I actually drew a comic to actually show how it works, like we talked about a real story. The teacher loved it. And so 2 weeks ago, last week or 2 weeks ago, I introduced it to principal, vice principal, mid-management in that school, elementary school. And the teacher then, again, they all loved it. So I'm going to introduce it at the end of the month to the entire staff. Yeah? So on one side is my activism by invention, you're not, or maybe I'm just using the Facebook strategy of entering schools before organizations, whatever. But the thing is, then the teacher was talking to a visiting occupational therapist, a woman actually came to observe my son in the school place to see how he behaves. The teacher was talking about park and flow to this person. Matteo overheard, and he came there and started talking about experiments and options. And this one could not believe it. So I'm going to, hopefully, maybe introduce it in healthcare. Who knows? But we're certainly going to talk about park and flow on her team, pretty much, because she said it's unbelievable. We use systems like that for much older kids, but this works really? She could not believe it. And then there's a guy here who so it works at personal level as well, right? I'm using it at personal level because it's about personal and interpersonal evolution, really. So personal level, this guy is using it to motivate himself. This is actually old. The last one was last week, 60 kilometers. I don't understand how he does it, but he's in Ericsson, so I have good hopes that he will introduce it as well. If he's not already, he's one of the kind of explorers, I guess, the early adopters. So every week, he sends me a link, saying, I'm doing 40 kilometers. It started with 20, then 40, 60 now. I don't know. You'll probably die along the way, but that's, you know, there is a little. Try another experiment. You must have some other problem, for God's sake, right? So I don't think that's a problem anymore, you know. But what I want to transmit, I guess, here to indicate is that continuous evolution is a way of life. I was talking to a CEO just a few weeks ago, and I said, you do not understand. Every single week, I'm 5 experiments older than you. You know, when you die, how old do you want to be? 2 experiments old or 20,000? Right? I'm aiming at the skateboarding kind of idea. Okay? And you can see that this is actually, I've taken that ages ago, but there's a cumulative flow. I can actually track it. And every week, if this is horizontal, means, well, you know what? I'm not agile enough. What else can I do? And every time I ask myself, why is only, as an average, 5 a week? Can I do 5 a day? What is impeding that? That's the mentality, right? I'm actually saying, is there anything structurally here that is impeding to do more often even? Okay? And you can also see this, the ratio actually is surprisingly still the same. This is what I passed, this is what I failed. Not failed as an experiment, I failed to meet my expectations as an experiment. All of them are learning. I'm not bothered by that at all. Projects under active development include a lightweight action deck to facilitate, you know, face-to-face conversations, discussion forum that, if you're interested, I would love if you could join, discuss.popcornflow.com. There's a secret, okay, moving on, there's a platform built, and finally, this is actually the book that is consuming this later part, I guess, of my work these days is a book I'm working on. Okay, so if you go to popcornflow.com or popcornflow.com/book, if you're interested, when it will be live, I'm aiming at October. I'll probably apologize in October, but that's but that's really what we're looking at, right? And rather than actually making something that is very specific to lean and agile, is more kind of personal and interpersonal change, okay? And then eventually there will be other books that are more specific, even on autism and whatever. So the final thought is this. We talk about ideas. We heard a lot of them today. And a lot of you, I'm sure, in the position where you are, you talk about ideas, innovation, change. And then there's people out there, right? They're different. They don't like change. They stick to the things that, you know, they're familiar to them. You may consider that more often than not, them is us, right? We're actually stuck to our mental cages. The brands we buy, the boxes we create for ourselves and others. Meanwhile, everything is on the move. I was talking to my son again, and I was saying, you know, Earth is into space now, and so Earth rotates around the sun is rotating around the galaxy is moving at 4.2, I think, million maybe, kilometers an hour, and in 40 billion years, like, it's going to crash to another galaxy, Andromeda. And I was very concerned about that, right? And I said, don't be concerned about that, because only in 4 billion years, like, the sun will explode. We'll die much earlier than that. You know, really, don't worry. But the thing is, like, everything is on the move, right? And yet, we pretend that everything doesn't change. So Popcorn Flow is kind of offering this kind of idea that we can really face anything that comes to us and react to this through evolution. We can evolve almost as fast as a virus, okay? And so now the ball is back to you. The point is, like, what are you going to do with this? What are you waiting for? There is indeed a world out there that needs to be changed, but it's a world that needs you to change. Thank you.
Very conscious this is Friday afternoon. This is effectively the graveyard shift. So this will be short, quick, hopefully useful, and might just keep you awake. But that's okay. It's Friday afternoon. If you fall asleep, that's okay too. My background is 20 years doing projects with Guinness GE and Intel, mostly for Intel. For the last 7 years, I've been running a company with a business partner. I tend to say I come from the dark side of the force. I've been doing projects in the trenches for multinationals, she had the brains to do exactly the same types, it turns out exactly the same type of techniques, but she did them in California and San Francisco for a company called IDEO. So I think she just had we talked earlier on this morning about doing things right and doing the right thing. I think she picked the right place to start, so that was good. We've recently been joined by another chap. He's a guy called Brian Hayes. He was the managing director of Citibank up until about a year and a half ago. If you like, myself and Christine, we do innovation at an individual, team and department stroke site kind of level, and Brian is one of those gods who just bestrides the planet, really. So it's an interesting kind of combination. What I'm going to talk about today, managing innovation is a huge topic. I'm going to try and keep it specifically aimed at around the kind of team level, with some reflections on a lot of the things that happened this morning. I thought it was really interesting listening to Jonathan this morning, and then some of the other things that popped up. I know Siobhan talked about, I think her thing was step 11, where a lot of technologists start. I'll show you the equivalent for this as well. It's step 2 of the prototyping stage. It's exactly the same kind of thing. So there'll be some references to what happened this morning, and then we'll take it from there. So what we get a lot of times is people kind of say, really, really busy, we've got all these normal imperatives, how do we start doing this innovation stuff? And my kind of take on it is, even if you're in a reasonably large site with a few hundred people, most organizations don't have enough people to put a full-time innovation capability in place and run it year-round. You just don't have enough resources to do 10 or 20 people whose only remit is to work on innovation projects. But you do have an awful lot of people who are doing normal projects, who are doing work. And so you can start acquiring the skills, you can start applying them to the normal stuff that you do. So the idea is to improve innovation competencies by building it, by starting with the existing busy teams and build it in from there, and then grow the capability as we go. So the first thing is, as a large company or a large department or working on a site here, that the first corporate mandate is continuous improvement. You've got to do the business as usual brilliantly. You cannot have screw-ups in the business as usual, because if you can imagine the way the conversation goes, we just trashed this week's production, but we got this really interesting new idea we'd like to talk to you about. It's kind of like, I don't think so. Let's talk about this week's production that you just trashed. So you've got to be really, really good. If you like, it's the whole OpEx space. The starting point then to sort of move on is new product or process or service implementation. So if you can be the landing site or the favorite company landing site for new things, where you're working with the people that are trying things out, then that's an interesting way to start doing it. And Ireland has some interesting benefits in this space, that it makes a really nice pilot space to try something out. I do find it interesting. We do this in a number of different sectors. We do it in ICT, financial services, food. We recently got a commission to do it in the biopharma space, which I just think is the engineering gods having a laugh, because I always hated chemistry. But the biopharma thing is absolutely intriguing. We've been talking to like 20, 30, 40 different companies, and we go to them and we kind of say, right, let's have a chat about innovation. Yeah, very important. Okay, how much innovation are you allowed to do? Absolutely none. The boys fly in when they've got a new thing, they set it up, and when they've got to set it up and running, they hand it over, and that's it. We never get to talk to them, we never get to try anything, we just run stuff. It's the most limited sector I've come across. It's just fascinating how different it can be. So the idea that the transition we're talking about is going from continuous improvement to new product or process implementation, getting up to the new product development. And the way into that, this is my effort at humour, I suppose. This, I think, wins the bucket. There's all sorts of really complicated project life cycle diagrams, and I'm sure you've seen the ones that look like, got stuff everywhere. This, I would like to present, is, I think, the simplest project life cycle diagram you're ever possible to meet. I tried to think, could you get it into one, but I'm not sure how. So you've got some kind of solution and some kind of execution. You can do it. It could take a year. The shortest version I've come across takes 10 minutes. But you've got some kind of, you've got to figure something out, and then you've got to go and do it. And what we're going to talk about is, how do you implement, where does innovation fit in this, and what can you do about it? And the basic approach, I'm sure you've sort of seen bits and pieces. Gara touched on it this morning. It's around the design thinking stuff. It's balancing the three different interests of the technology, the business, and the people. Siobhan talked very eloquently about the product stuff and how it brings it together. The people thing, if we reflect on that for a minute, people are total bastards. They are totally unreliable. And I've been collecting scenarios and stories in which kind of encapsulates what goes on with them. There was a lovely one. The IDEO guys had a nice four-head one that kind of shows and says, you got to understand, it's not just the person, you got to understand their head, their heart, their mind, and their stomach. You know, it's what they want to do, what they think they want to do, what they don't realize yet that they don't know how to do, and all these different things. I came across a recent one which just threw the whole complexity into a whole different space. There was a study done on why witness statements are so undependable, that they vary so much, that you know, a number of witnesses looking at the same event will give completely different accounts of it. So there was lots of research done, and there was one particular psychologist who was the one that seems to have cracked it the most. She studied hundreds of hours of policemen taking witness statements. And she looked at the format, she looked at the tone, she tried it with the sound off, she tried it with the sound on, she looked at the range of questions, the number of questions, where they were sitting in relation to each other, how far apart they were, what kind of open demeanours they had in their faces. And it turned out that the most telling factor was the gentler, the quieter, the more polite, the more approachable the policeman was in asking the witness to describe it, the worse the information was about what actually happened. We are not good machines at conveying data. So there was a couple of times we touched on it this morning. When someone says to you about users, my best quote about users actually came from an IT guy who I'd been asked to sort of sit in on their strategy plan, and I may have mentioned this last year. His comment on talking to users was, on a site with 2,500 people in an IT department of 250 people, he said, I'm not going out to talk to users. He actually put it a lot more impolitely than that, but that's what I'll quote. He said, if I talk to 10 users, I'll get 12 opinions. I am not talking to users. So, first of all, I completely confess users are completely unreliable. And I think what compounds it, I think, in the ICT space, that's where users are at their worst. They are awful because of their impact. I remember counting 2 ads in the Irish Times, which just amused me for the contrast. 25 grand for a car. There was about 13 things you could specify, the colour of the engine, you know, all this kind of stuff. There was a PC. It's back a while. On the other side of the page, and there was 35 things you could specify, and it was 1/10 the price of the car. I'm not an ICT person, so I can bow here and say, you just got the tough end of the stick, lads and lasses. You have the hardest area when it comes to understanding users. And that doesn't excuse it. You still have to go and figure it out. So I'm sorry, but you got to do it. So let's go on. The second piece then here, and I'm interested in how this ties into Claudio's stuff. This is a design thing, an innovation cycle. And the first piece, there's a couple of steps in here. The first one is get the best technology you can. The second one says go try and, when you've done it and you've applied it, go try steal stuff from other sectors where, you know, it's being really lazy. If you can find another sector that has done something and you bring it in and you look like a rock god because you've come up with something that's absolutely wonderful, but the thing is already stable, commercial, widely available, totally supported, it's got commercially valid price points, you look great and you didn't do a damn thing. It's terrific. So what you try and do is by the time you get to here, you've got the MVS, or the MV, it's the minimum viable problems that you're trying to solve. And then you come to this piece here, which is where most technologists start, as they start seeing beads of sweat on their foreheads. At this point, you start talking to users. And that's a killer, but you got to do it. Then you get into the idea generation and then the prototyping. And I was amused, Claudio, listening to the thing. I think the little experiments you talked about, they're actually prototype processes, because you're trying a process to see if it works, and you're perfectly at liberty to say at the end of it, well, we tried it, and it was a bum, so we're not doing it. Or it worked, but we're going to tweak it further. So it really just means trying it. There is one group of people that I have more sympathy for than you guys in terms of your challenge with users. It's any creative types. Anyone here, creative, graphic design background? Oh, one, I can ignore you, though. That's Claudio, by the way, so I'm not doing too bad. When creatives come in here, what they love to say is, you've got to fail often and fail early. And I always kind of go, oh, dear God, please don't say that in front of business people, because all they hear is fail, fail, fail. You have to find a better verb, and I think your one is perfect. So experiment. You know. The way this works in the project space when we're doing it with teams is, you got to do it. And I was amused at the thing. You got to do it 3 times. Once is not enough, and you'll see the 3 thing coming back a few times. First is around the concept, second's around the features, third's around the interactions. Does this work? Yes. This bit here, the balance between the people, technology, and business. You're trying to make sure that balance is there. You go through an exercise, you come out with a potential solution. You check the balance again, you go through it again, you check the balance again, you go out. By the time you get to here, you want a really good solution which is well-founded. It meets the business requirements. It's going to be buildable for the money we think it's going to take, and it's going to make money when it gets out there. It's going to be technically, it's the right thing, it's at the right point, and users want it. And we'll come back to users. I did say we'd come back to users because they're feckers. I'm going to talk about 5 basic techniques that we're using in this kind of early space. And they're kind of interesting. Stakeholders, I find this interesting. This is for teams, so a lot of you would be at the level of getting teams to do things for you, and I'm always amused about this. When I say stakeholders, a lot of teams, or more junior teams, they immediately assume I mean the supervisor of the PM. They have a very narrow view of who it is. What I mean is anybody who might feel impacted by the project. Find them now and talk to them now. Have a cup of coffee with them while they're still relaxed and figure out what do they, so what are you going to have to bribe them with to get them to accept the project at the end when you're finished with it. But it's that human interaction that starts. What you have to, oh, that's interesting how I did it. Yeah. So what you're trying to find out from stakeholders is what are their needs, desires, fears, forms, and assumptions. What are they thinking about? And what assumption, maybe they've assumed that they're going to be part of this project and they aren't, but they can create a stink if you don't get to them first and stop them. So the one thing I find very interesting about this is the contrast between multinational teams and startup teams. Startup teams couldn't care less about stakeholders. They just want to focus on users, and that's fine. Multinational teams, they do so much work for users, and they do that much work for stakeholders. And as one team put it for me, they said, see, Keith, the problem is we got to find the feckers, the way he actually said it was, we got to find the fuckers that want to kill us and kill them before they kill us. And that was his attitude. And he was talking about people in his own company. It was, I'm sort of pushing this thing where I kind of think, there's B2C started everything off, and then there's B2B, and now I think there's D2D. And D2D is department to department. And I think department to department is actually more cutthroat than, I think there's a lot of people in departments who would really prefer to be dealing with their competitors than they would be dealing with the assholes 50 feet up the corridor. It's weird. It's just really weird. So in terms of understanding stakeholders, you've got to identify them, you've got to find them, you've got to work with them. And maybe they aren't that bad. Because one of the things that we've started to see is that people go out and talk to them, they kind of, one particular group was quite funny. They started in Dublin, got a contact to California, found out there was a guy sitting 80 feet from them in Dublin that they should talk with. He referenced them to Israel. They found the Israeli team, and they connected up, and they found out actually some really good news. The first thing was the Israelis were working on something slightly different. So now both teams look good because they're both working on different aspects of a similar problem. So now they both can, pretend it's actually a serious problem. So they look better. The thing that really heartened the guys in Ireland, though, was the Israelis were a year behind them, so they became the lead team, which really made them feel good. So, Schadenfreude is alive and well. So it's a really important part of getting this. The one thing you have to be careful about is when we're working with teams, we normally get them to do something like this, where we get them to rate the stakeholders by the degree of involvement and the degree of positivity or negativity towards the project. So up here, change champions who will help you, and willing helper, someone who's ambivalent about it, someone who thinks you won't go won't fail, and someone who will actually want to kill you. Do not ever leave. The typical thing is you put post-its on it and you've got it in the wall in the room. Do not leave this around. If you leave this around and someone says, I want to have a chat about why you put me up here, you bastard. It can be really, really unpleasant, so don't. Eat it if you have to, but don't leave it for anyone to see. But it is a really great way to sort of picture it. And generally what we say to people is, people can be here for quite genuine reasons. It's not that they particularly dislike you. The trick is try and start saying, okay, what would it take to move you to neutral? To make it less of an issue for you. And there's some of the reasons that have come out, like people in this space, because you want to do it in December, and we're busy, really busy November, December, January. If we do it in October, no problem. Do it in January or February, no problem. And it's just, it's gas how it comes out. The second one then is about users. And I mentioned the IT guy about the numbers. Users are not nuisances. They are the people that you're doing the thing for, and you have to get into their heads and you have to find out what it is that they want. And I'll touch on this a few times. Users quite frequently they don't know what you can do for them. And they're not interested because it's your job to figure out what they need because you're the one that's providing the service. So they are not even going to sit down and give you a particularly detailed level description of what it is that they want. They expect you to do that. So you're the one that has to take it to them, and your team has to go and find out what they want. And if that means you have to go and sit down beside them and watch what they're doing, then you've got to go and sit down beside them and watch what they do. Take pictures of what they do. Take screenshots. Try and understand their world so you can bring it back. This is the fact that they are such lousy raconteurs about what's going on is we'll come back to when we talk about the prototyping stuff. So first of all, you've got to identify them and engage with them. It's good to essential to do that. I talked to one group during the year who had done a project where it was, they put a system out in work, and it was a HVM, a high volume manufacturing site. They put it on shift for all the shift workers. The shift workers just didn't use it. They did all the calculations offline, just put the results in, which totally defeated the purpose of the system, which was supposed to capture all the learning from what they're doing. So I said, well, the guy that was telling me about it actually worked for IT, and I said to him, so what happened when the developers spoke to the shift staff about not using it? What do you think his answer was? It's even worse. They're not allowed. The developers are not allowed to talk to the users, right? And I said, okay, so how did you find out what they needed? Oh, the requirements guys went in. So the requirements people went in and spoke to the shift workers and came back with a list of photos, and that got turned into a tech spec, which got turned into everything you need to do the work. And then it got built according to the spec, and it got tested according to the spec, and it passed. It passed the spec beautifully. Then it got handed over, and nobody wanted to use it. So it's just, you know, you guys are experienced enough, you've seen this. I think the interesting thing for me, the semi-amusing thing about it is, you know that thing about getting to know users, trying to understand them, creating personas, trying to understand the non-technical requirements they have? I know most technical people kind of go, first of all, it's bollocks. Secondly, it's trying to write an English essay. I stopped doing that 25 years ago. I'm not doing it anymore. Third thing, I've had people say to me, when their bosses said, yeah, we're doing it. And I sort of spoke to them and said, you doing the personas? Yeah, and I could see the look of pain going across the guy's face. He said, yeah, we write the personas, but we put them in a desk drawer and just forget about them after. How do you go from an emotional splurge to what impact that has on which features you should use and what way you should create those features so that they're actually able to use it? And that is the challenge. So you've got to go from basically an English essay about behaviors and likes to something that actually influences the feature set. So not easy, but absolutely mandatory. The idea generation stuff, I always find this interesting. Let's talk about participants for a moment. When we talked about stakeholders and we said, right, think about the 2 or 3 core stakeholders you're thinking of in terms of seniority, and then go, which departments think they're interested? Which departments aren't really but would like to be? Which experts on site would have a massive passing interest in this? That group of people is the group you invite to the first idea generation session. And you tell them, listen, we're going to have an hour. And you use the 4 commanding control tools that you have at your disposal as a senior PM or technical architect. You arrange for one of coffee, cake, pizza, or beer. And you get them in the door because they don't want to come in the door. And even if they're the customer, they definitely don't want to come in the door because you're 9 months away from handing anything over and they're too busy to come in. So you bribe them. I don't care. Bribe them legally and morally, lads. There's nothing weird going on. Coffee, cake, food, and pizza and beer. Is that 5? They're okay, right? So you get them in. There's a golden moment here for getting people in where someone goes, you know, what about, and someone else says, yeah, but it'd have to, and you make those connections and they form part of they shape the scope. One of the things we've done, and I find it quite interesting, the 3 thing from Claudio, we've had to start kind of turning it into a process because we used Californian words of encouragement and said, go wild, go deep. And people kind of went, yeah, no. So the 6 of them would sit around a table and one of them would write. That's not idea generation. That's making an idea list, but it's not idea generation. So there's a couple of things to get them to do it. We started this year. We tried a few things. We said, right, we want you to populate this thing with the stuff the ideas that are 100% relevant to the particular problem or solution, and they go away like mad and they write stuff down. And then we say, right, now we want you to pull out some features of that, and they pull out features that are representative. And then we say, right, now we want you to fill one that is 50% relevant to those particular things. And they go, okay, right, so they go do that. And when they've done that, we say, pull out some of the features that are, sort of representative of this. So you're kind of teaching them to build a framework. And then we say, right, here's the really hard one. Now come up with some stuff that is 1% relevant. That's how far out you're going. But it's based off these things, so they populate it. And when they've done that, if you like, this is an idea field, to borrow a concept from physics. This means that you have robustly and deeply enough gone into it that you are able to make sure that you've got enough ideas to do this. What happens most of the time is people have 10 or 11 ideas here. What we do with this is we'll get 80 to 90 ideas from a team in the same time, which will give them a much deeper impression of what's going on, and you can take it from there. Now, I've had really OpEx-obsessed managers who said to me, okay, so efficiency-wise, that's 90 ideas. Let's assume it takes 4 minutes per idea to assess the idea. That is 368 minutes. How do we budget for the 5 hours to assess the ideas? And I kind of go, okay, that's not how it works. So what you do is you kind of cluster them and you go, yeah, it's kind of one area, and that's kind of another area, and that's kind of another area, and there's kind of another area here. Know how to do that. We've got questions about this, questions about that, and that's just not attractive. It's the questions you take forward into the prototyping, and that's how to handle it. So you do not, by the way, you do not list all 80 or 90 ideas. That is not. If the worst you might do is if you've got these as Post-its, take a picture of it. Or take the thing away and put it on the wall and use it during the period of doing the project, but you do not list all the ideas. The really good thing about creating this kind of people movement is if you get the folks in at the start and you get them helping with this, you get 3 things again, that's magic number. You get their feedback immediately, you get their buy-in and their enthusiasm for the following few months. So you start getting the point where someone will ring you up and say, "You still working on that project?" And you're going, "I haven't seen my wife and my kids in 6 months." "Yes, I'm still working on the damn project." They say, "You might like to know something changed," and they see you as part of their community. So I don't know why, but it works. I don't care either. The prototyping is the next step. So for the questions that come out of the idea generation, principally, it's either the stuff you don't know how to do or where you've got a couple of options. You're looking either for the cheap way to do something or the way to wow something. So you're looking to see, okay, what would be really, really wonderful, or what can we do really efficiently, where we're going to be worried about how to do it. A phrase that came up, and thank you as I was going through this week, what this is really about is feature proofing. It's kind of a slight tweak on future proofing, and I like wordplay, so this amused me. What you're doing is you are proving the features that they request are the ones that they actually want. And the way this works is they tell you, you do have the initial discussion online, or you might do a survey and it looks like they want ABCD. You go off and you code for 6 weeks, you bring back ABCD, you get them to use it, and they do lots of A, bit of B, never mention C again in their entire lives, and a bit of D. And this is how, with the prototyping, that you actually, you're setting yourself up and going very politely, prove to me that you need every feature that you want. Because every feature you prove to me that you need, I'm going to spend 6 weeks, or my team is going to spend 6 weeks or 12 weeks building. I am not doing it, I'm not starting it until you prove to me that you want it. So it's a very nice way of engaging it. There is another real big aspect in it that think about prototyping as 3D idea generation. It's very easy, even if you're all standing at a window with Post-its and you've got lovely pictures and everything. It doesn't take much effort to throw up a few ideas. What prototyping starts to do is it starts to give you physical validation that actually the thing they want is what they want. And you start to see, in an effective prototyping session, you start to see some interesting signs going on. At this point, I kind of feel if I just saw the video of a prototyping session, I'm almost certain I could tell you whether it's going well or not, because you'll see things like, if they're engaging, you'll see things like, no, you can see the shirts and the sleeves going up, or, oh yeah, and if it does this, or it would have to do that. You get these kinds of conversations going on, so they can really help shape it. The other thing is the 3 number. I'm becoming a disciple of Claudio now at this point. But it was Siobhan this morning talked about, technologists love to step in at step 11. What we normally do is the first, I kind of push 3 levels. The first one is, if they want something, give them pen and paper, preferably big crayons and A3 sheets, and say, draw me what you want. And have a blank face. Don't show any sign that you think what they're asking for is doable or weird or anything like that. Get them to do it first. The problem is most technologists I work with, they want to jump in for the second stage. They kind of go, oh, well, I'm pretty sure I know the 8 things they want, so I'll do Balsamic or an Envision thing and I'll give them straight away. And the problem about that is, like if we go back to the thing about how bad witnesses are, if you say which of these 8, it exactly mirrors Siobhan's comment about give me your top 10 list. Maybe there aren't 10 things on the list. Maybe there's only 4. But if you push yourself and you find the extra 6, they will give you opinions about the 6. And then if you statistically analyze them, you'll end up thinking that you've got to produce them all. So you've got to have that first one in there to sort of have the thing about what would they really want, what would they really need. A second piece that I've seen teams throw in very successfully is to throw in something like the Christmas question when things start to die off a bit and say, what would this have to do for you to make this the best project that you've ever done in your life? And then they start asking you for stuff that they've never mentioned before either. And the big surprise about this stuff is they don't ask for Star Trek's, what was it, transportation system, the teleportation thing. They ask for stuff that's actually perfectly sane. And the big question in my mind is usually, why the hell didn't you ask me for this first? And it's kind of like, well, I didn't know you could do it for me. So it's about getting to that terrible thing about the unknown unknowns and making space for the unknown knowns, where you allow this stuff to bubble up. I did have a moment of amusement about this as well. I was kind of thinking, I don't know if you ever, I'm sure you've got some experience of this, or some of you have done it, where whenever we used to be asked for a report from a corporate system that we had, we used to run the numbers on the person that made the request, and we would pull up, how many times has this person asked us to do a special report for them in the past? And then we would pull up, and how many times have they run it? And if they had asked for a lot of things, which then they had used lots of them, we would go, please come into our lair, talk to us about what you want. And if they had asked for several things and never actually run them, we ran them. So it was kind of a simple thing. So then building a library is sort of capturing the kind of things you're doing so you're used to them. The landing zone is an interesting one. It's where I thought the dialogue this morning from Jonathan was very interesting. I think there's two ways to engage with individuals or teams that have come out, that have echoed for me today. When it came to the individuals, to reflect back on Jonathan's one of the things that always cracks me up, because we do project management and we lecture on project management and all that kind of stuff, and it always amuses me when you get to the bit in the book where it talks about team selection. Because most of the time you don't get to choose, right? You're just given the people on the team. You might get occasionally to do, but most of the time you don't. But the most successful thing I've discovered is if you look at the scope and you talk to the team members and say to them, which bit of this interests you? Which bit of these is something that you would find challenging but you would love to work on? And then match the scope that way. You get some very weird results. You get a very, very experienced person who turns out to be completely bored and fed up doing what on their job description says they should be doing. And they're kind of going, no, please find someone else to do it for me. I'd kill myself if I had to do that again. On the other hand, you get someone that's a bit younger, perhaps a little bit less experienced, but you give them something they're interested in. And I've had the experience of having someone come running up and walking into work one morning, and it was when Jonathan was talking about, how do you feel coming in? I had this guy come running up to me, and his eyes are on fire, and he's really delighted. And he says, we did this yesterday for the third time, and I knew we'd get it right, and it was right. And I'm kind of going, I have no idea what you're talking about. But in my head, anyway, I didn't say this to him. But I know that he's really, really excited, and it's worked. So I'm a winner already. I don't need to know what he's talking about. I just need to know, hey, he wouldn't be telling me if it hadn't worked. So obviously it's good. And then the team thing. This is the point about the team. What we do with teams is we say to them, right, we want you to go off and do the scope. We want you to do the exploration. We want you to do the testing. And we want you to come back with the minimum, medium, and maximum version of the scope. We want you to tell us what's the minimum version, the medium, and maximum version of this project that you could do. And we want you to tell us, given your understanding of the business context, which version you think we should do. And when they present it back, then the senior managers get a chance to put their, obviously, better handle of the business context on top of it. But the team gets a better chance to engage. And one of the things I've seen with this is they seem to feel better ownership for it then as they go forward. It's a bit like, this is only like 10, 15, 18% of the way into whatever they're doing, but they seem to understand the context better when they've done this, so that when it comes to delivering it, they're much more comfortable with what's going on. Yeah, so that just says teams understand deeply, they learn, choose, recommend, and the managers check it and then choose and decide. Portfolio management, I think probably the biggest learning about the innovation stuff is you have to keep it separate to the operation stuff. I absolutely think that the continuous stuff is very, very important, because if you aren't doing continuous stuff, trying to bring in a big new change is just a killer. We actually use it as a sales discriminator. If someone says they want to do innovation projects, my general first question to them is, how do you do projects generally? And if they say, oh, well, we're actually pretty bad at it, my kind of thing is, if you're pretty bad at routine change, why, in the name of God, would you take on a big change? Because you know already you're not going to succeed. So let's go for a year or two to get better at routine stuff and move up. So the routine stuff it's absolutely essential. The other side of it too is that in terms of all the multiple departments you need to bring together for a large organization, the killer is the stuff around the edge. I guarantee if you have a meeting where 10 projects are being discussed and there's someone from finance and they're looking at the 400,000, 300,000, 250,000, 150,000, and there's 3 for 10 grand, the finance person will consider it a victory if they kill the 3 for 10 grand. Because the other big ones are operations ones, they're much less risky, the scope is much better understood. Those 10 ones stand out like a sore thumb. They're just obviously follies. You just want to mess about. And frankly, yes, the answer is yes, and we're technologists and we're good in that, and that's why we should do it. But they should be kept in separate lists. And is that everything? So is that all you have to do to do it? So I bring good news. I think I was having a biblical moment when I wrote that down, but there's a few basic things. So the first is you probably have 65, 70, 75% of all the processes you will need for kind of innovation management generally within your companies already, especially if the companies is anyway reasonable size. You'll have the HR, IT, finance, change, projects. You'll have a lot of what's needed. The starting point is just to get a handle on that and see what can we do with what we have. The second thing is, I know someone, Jonathan gave you all the role of Chief Innovation Officer this morning. I'm going to give the title I'm bestowing on you for the afternoon is Ninja Technologist, right? The whole point, apparently, about martial arts, which I've never studied in any way whatsoever, so I'm totally, just risking it here, is the idea is to use the weight of your opponent against them, right? The really nice thing about technologists is, well, the really bad thing about them is they quite frequently hate anything new, but the really good thing is they're total suckers for processes. So if you can take something new and make it look like a process that they have been using for ages or are familiar with, they spread like wildfire. It's like a virus. So if you can make it look familiar, they will adopt it very, very quickly. So the ninja technologist thing is use that fact and go for process transmissibility. So one of the things we do with usually the first team in a company that we're working with is our first challenge to them is find the 3 processes that you think will make the biggest difference and then rewrite them using company-headed notepaper to make them look exactly like the normal processes that you all work with and make them look like an SOP. Use the same paragraph descriptions, use whatever you do, make it look like it's been here forever. And they tend to go fairly smoothly. It's gas. And then the last thing is demand, expect, and measure. Start putting a line on it and saying, how many times have we been doing this kind of stuff? And you really have to put, one of the key ones for me is that 3 levels of prototyping. I've met a lot of really good project managers who just don't get the need for the first one. They just kind of go, well, we know what they need. And unfortunately, in terms of the things you can do and the things you can stop you, the worst possible thing you can hear for an innovation project is for a senior manager or PM to say, why are we doing this? We know what we need. It's like the kiss of death. You know you're never going to get to anything special if they start saying that. So, that's me done. Only 2 minutes over. Any questions? Any disbelievers? I love the line from Life of Brian, persecute, kill the heretic.
I will say, whenever I see the word stakeholder, I think of those old Dracula movies with the cross.
Yeah. I mean, I've had some very weird situations where I got dumped in a project once where I had to put something in and there was a bunch of departments on a site and the whole site actually hated us because they'd just been bought over. So there was all sorts of stuff going on. And we had to have a conversation with each single department to see what would it take for you to take this on board. And I saw a line recently about a thing that when economists do things about companies, they kind of assume that the companies are full of people all marching in the same direction. And actually, it couldn't be further from the truth. And that thing about, well, which department needs what to get them to engage and want and be at least neutral about participating, it's actually quite an important thing to do, but it's not usually given much airtime. I've seen people who might do it in a cursory way. They might make a list, an Excel spreadsheet, and it just doesn't bring the rabid nastiness to the fore so you can see it. I desperately answered the one question I got far too long. Sorry about that. That it? Thank you very much. Pleasure. Thank you.
Data in the New World Order. Yeah, it's a rather lofty title, Data in the New World Order. Yes, I'm the principal data scientist at Independent News Media. So I did see a couple of copies of the Indo in here earlier. We're predominantly working in the digital wing of the business. Just to give you a brief overview of what we have. So independent.ie you may be familiar with, sundayworld.com, belfasttelegraph.co.uk, the Evening Herald. So there's about 5 or 6 group websites that we will be looking at, plus a whole bunch of e-commerce sites that we will be managing. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is probably most of the learnings came from the role before being in INM when I worked in telecommunications. Worked with a lot of people who were trying to build big data lakes or trying to build essentially data warehouses on steroids using new technologies like Hadoop and HBase and Spark and all these great big data technologies that are coming out.
it's not, well, there's 2 slides. It's not surprising that people are talking about data. We've seen a lot of people succeed in the space with data over a long period of time now. Data's not that new. We're now talking about big data, and we're talking about having lots more data. But in reality, people have been worrying about data for a long, long time. I'm standing on a creaky board, which is rather annoying. People have been talking about data for a very, very long time. People like Tesco's and Walmart have been using it for a very long time to organize the layout of their stores. They've been analyzing, what items are bought together. For some reason, nappies and beer go really, really well together. So what do? You put them on the shelf beside one another, or do you put them on the opposite ends of the shop so that you have to pass by everything else in order to collect those 2 items? They also use those to be able to target coupons to people, to say, you like this stuff. Well, we'll give you a discount on the competitor's product, and the competitor will pay us to give you a Heinz beans voucher, even though you always buy Bachelor's beans, and maybe try and convert you over. More recently, Facebook have really obviously become one of the kings of data, right? They're collecting huge amounts of data on different people, from demographic information to their people's interests, their social networks, who they're connected to, which can be hugely valuable in trying to mine behaviors out of people. And they're using that information to enable companies to target and to find segments of people that will buy their product. And Amazon, I don't think anybody, everybody in the room has bought something from Amazon at least once and will have seen the recommendation strategies that they use. People who looked at this product went on to buy, people like you buy, recommended for you based upon your past purchases. They're mining the data, they're understanding what you do. And that is in the sort of the B2C world. There's a huge amount going on under the hood. If you're in the telecommunications market, you have companies that are understanding churn models to see what are the indicators that say that you're going to move to one of our competitors, right? Your call rate slightly decreases. You start texting more people on the competitor network because your friends have just moved over there. And then they say, you're going to leave. Now, how do we keep you? How do we enact our retention model to make that work? So I could talk all day about this. The problem that's coming from it is that a lot of businesses are under considerable pressure at the moment. And the pressure that they're under is they're told by the board or somebody within their business that you have very valuable data. Why are you not making the most out of it? Data equals dollars. And I don't know whether you sat in any of these meetings. I sit in a lot of these meetings and have done over the last 5 or 6 years. How are we going to monetize our data? How are we going to make more out of it? And I actually was going to be even more sort of insightful with this and change that instead of product strategy, the business strategy 2015, right? Because there's a lot of companies out there now whose 2015 business strategy is, it's okay, we've data. It's great, we'll make money. And there's a fundamental flaw with this. It's the biggest fallacy that data is valuable. I suppose that's maybe going a bridge too far. Maybe it's fair to say all data is valuable. So what Claudia mentioned earlier, there's a key message that he wants you to take away. My next slide is the key message that I want everybody to take away from this, right? If beauty is in the eye of the beholder, the same is true for the value of data. Data has no intrinsic value. It is intrinsically valueless. It is just a load of bits and bytes on a hard drive somewhere. In order for it to be valuable, we have to identify what its value is and find somebody who will give us some money to make that a valuable proposition in the market. And I don't think this should really come as any surprise to anybody, because marketeers have been used to validating all sorts of products over time. And we go out there, we find out who the potential customers might be. We go out and we validate with those customers and say, would you buy this? And they say, no. So we pivot and we go back around and we come and say, right, okay, maybe we'll change it, make it look blue and a bit bigger and a bit smaller and a bit wider. And we come back and eventually we find the right combination of features that will lead us to a valuable product within the market. For some reason, that doesn't always hold with data. People don't kind of do it. They worry about it, and they struggle to understand how they can go to market with a data product and say, how do I talk to my customers about this? How do I say to a potential third party who I want to sell segmentation data to? How do I talk to them about the sorts of information I can give them about the customers? Are we always going to have that information? Is that data really valuable? I don't know, and I don't know how to communicate it. And that can be really, really challenging. So it leads to a number of situations that are probably quite undesirable. It stems back to one fundamental thing, and I think Keith hit on it very well in the previous presentation. We have different types of people in our business, and they have two very different perceptions of product. And this is nothing new. We've known about this for a very, very long time. Our technical teams understand the product as the engine. They know how the code is written. They know the flow that data takes through the system. And they know all the APIs that they've written and where the bugs lie and where to be careful. The teams on the right-hand side are used to the external visible interfaces of the system. They know that this thing is a machine that drives at a certain speed, that it outputs a bit of exhaust at the back, and it's blue, and that's great. Data has, for most people, existed under the hood. It's something that I don't need to really worry about as a non-technical person. Data it's an intrinsically technical thing, and I'm not going to worry about it. Now, all of a sudden, I do have to worry about it. And this gap, when a marketeer needs to take data and bring it to market to validate it, or somebody in a sales role who has been selling untargeted advertising for 10, 15, 20 years, all of a sudden now has to go to market and say, I'm going to start selling targeted segments of advertising. How do they suddenly go, I've got to start worrying about data and who I'm targeting and how big those segments are? It's a really, they have to start crossing to some side of the other side of the gap. We worked out how to bridge this gap a lot. We talked about it earlier in terms of requirements is one way that we bridge this gap. We have a formal set of requirements that we pass over the gap. Maybe we put technical pre-sales teams in place who go out with sales teams to sort of make that technical part of the sale that little bit easier and to make our lives go a little bit smoother. We need to, when we start talking about data, to understand how are we going to fix these problems that we're now seeing when we try and bring this data from under the hood and bring it out front and center. So what I want to talk about, before I talk about some sort of success stories and things that we've done in I&M recently, I want to talk about some of the conversations that happen in the gap when technical people meet non-technical people. I've had this conversation, I don't know how many times, I've been involved, I've seen this conversation happen many times, where everybody's acting in their best possible faith. Keith said people are, I think he used the word bastards, and it's true, they are. And some of the examples later on, I think, start to head in that direction. But I think in this use case, everybody's trying to do their best. Somebody from the marketing team says, well, I've been sort of instructed that I need to understand how we can monetize our data more effectively. What data do we have? And the logical response from someone trying to be helpful is go, well, here's all the schemas. Here's some examples of the data. And you get somebody from a non-technical world who sits there going, what do I do now? This is beyond my skill set. How am I going to be able to understand this? And the technical person on the other side is actually really excited. It's like, oh my God, somebody's finally wants to look at this great data we've been capturing. We knew there was value in there, and someone's going to go and find out what's valuable now to the market. I'm so happy. But where we end up in reality is that everybody's probably going to be quite frustrated. Those schemas will sit in somebody's email box until somebody shouts the next time and says, why are we not monetizing our data more effectively? It leads to the next problem, which I call the sort of the pass the problem conversation, which is that the non-technical person asks the obvious question, when you sent me all that data, which part of that data is valuable? And the technical person stands there and goes, I haven't a clue. I'm not a mind reader. I don't know what your customers are going to want to buy. So, and it's a chicken and an egg situation. Your marketeer can't work out what the valuable data is because they can't get into the data to understand what data is there. The technical person can't tell you what's valuable because they can't talk to the customer to understand what's valuable. Again, everybody's hugely frustrated and nobody knows what to do. These two use cases mandate probably partially some of what I do in an organization as a data scientist. which is evangelization and working with people within the business to show them that data is not that scary. It's actually something that you can understand, especially when working in a newspaper. You have all the typical roles that you would have within a normal business in terms of having sales and marketing and technical teams and product management and project management. But now you have this additional department in terms of having editorial. You have journalists who are another totally different type of user. You end up, journalists predominantly come from the humanities. We technically come from the sciences. There's just a complete difference towards even the basic courses we took in university. A lot of people in the humanities will have run away from the mathematics because they just didn't like it. It wasn't for them. They wanted to head in the direction of English and history, and vice versa. I went the other way. So data is scary for them. And when you start presenting a journalist with information on how their story performed or the type of user that's interacting with their story, and it doesn't line up with their gut, with their feeling for what they thought was reality, it can be very jarring. So you really have to think about how you're going to present this information out there and make it work. Let's imagine we get to probably a better situation, right? We've now got everybody talking a little bit more. We've had some of those initial conversations. Really, in those last two cases, it's about getting everybody in the room and not passing the buck so much by throwing the data at them and not passing the buck so much by saying, hey, what's valuable, but actually making it more of a collaborative process to find out what we have in terms of valuable data. Define some MVPs, use a lean model, define what we can bring to market, what we can go and ask our users if they might want to have, go talk to the advertising partners we have and say, if we could target ads based upon this data, would that be valuable to you? Would you buy that from us? Great, okay, we can move forward with that. This is what I call the coverage confusion conversation, right? So this, again, happens quite regularly. Someone asks, do we have social data about our users? And the guy goes, yeah, we have social data about our users, yeah. If we're going to build a product, we can integrate that data into the data store that we have. And the person, great, we have 500,000 customers, social data, this is fantastic. But in reality, we only have social data for about 6% of our customers, and somebody failed to mention that. So you can go off and build the best use case in the world, and when you actually go to work out how valuable it is, you've got to scale it down to 6%. This can be explosively dangerous. I've seen businesses go and build use cases on the back of that confusion and realize they don't have a business model anymore when they get out the other side. So you really have to be very cautious from a technical perspective if you're talking to somebody who's building use cases to explain not only that you have the data, but how much of it you actually have. The next step is to say, well, how much of it do we have and what quality is it? Because I could say, yeah, we have social data. And somebody goes, okay, well, where's that social data come from? Oh, it comes from Facebook. Okay, cool, great, we've got Facebook data. What does Facebook data include? Well, you can get demographics and interests. I can get all my friends. I can get the posts that you've made, the things you've liked in the past, the brands that you've interacted with. And people can go crazy, brilliant. They've understood that it only has 6% coverage, but they still think it's really, really valuable. This is great. We can actually build a business case on this. But in reality, this data has very different levels of quality. Some users you will have all this information for. Some users will have put in that their date of birth is 1920 when they're 18 years old because they don't want to share their age online. Some of these people won't have filled in any interest profiles. Some of these people will never interact with a brand. They never like anything. And there'll be pockets that do all those different behaviors. So there's a radius of different quality of data within here. So being able to communicate that effectively, the data that's inside your product and what sort of size it has, but also what sort of quality it has to the people who are looking to utilize and monetize that data is very important. A cousin of coverage confusion is overlap confusion. So it's sort of a very similar conversation, but a little bit different, which is where we have two different data sets. Okay, so we have social data and location data. Now we're starting to get into big data territory, right? Starting to integrate multiple data sets together and key them and start to look at different aspects. And the technology says, yeah, we're going to integrate both of those into our product, and we'll have both of those in the data store. Again, our marketeer or our salesperson has learned, okay, great, what's the coverage of those two? Don't want to get coverage confusion here. 6% of our users have social data and 30% of our users have location data. Great, okay, I can work with that. But a use case that requires an overlap between those data sets may only have 2% of the users for whom we have both types of data. And we have to be very, very cautious of that. The extension of this is really bad again, which is you can assumption can be layered on top of that, and assumption in data is very dangerous. So in this case, where are our high-value users? And they're down here, and the overlap's even worse, if there's an overlap at all. If you consider, let's say INM, let's say you're looking at people who buy the newspaper versus people who read news online. What's the overlap between those two data sets? Where are the high-value customers for particular types of products? So a high-value customer for, say, a subscription service where you send the newspaper out to everybody every day, the age group and demographic of that group is probably going to be quite a bit older than the age and demographic for the people who are likely to buy fashion products through independent.ie when we write a style article that contains a picture of one of the royals wearing a nice black dress. They're two completely different sets of values of customer. One is probably going to overlap quite nicely with your social data. One probably won't overlap with any of your digital data, and is going to overlap on maybe some data that you've collected through surveys or direct advertising or things like that. So that covers one of the other conversations. This is the worst one. It can start without even the green guy on the right-hand side, which is probably one of those. It can be a single conversation that can happen in a room between one person and themselves, which is okay, we can't work out what the coverage is. We can't understand what the overlaps are going to be. We don't know how to communicate this to our customers to find out what the value is. Let's just build it. Just collect it all. You know, the data's valuable. Collect it all and store all that data in our data warehouse, data lake, data pond, data stream. I've heard them all. Data ocean. I've worked on one of each of these projects at some point in time. I've worked on somebody who has been with somebody who's been working on one of these projects. The worst part of it is that the technologist generally goes, yay, I get to use technology. I get to go out there and learn Hadoop, Spark, HDFS. I get to play with all these great new technologies, get to do some training courses, but get all that data, which we all intrinsically know it has value. We all know it has value. We have all these examples of Amazon and Google and Facebook and Walmart and all these people that have made money from this data. So sure, let's build it. Build it and they will come. The problem is that 2 years later, and many, many, many millions of dollars later, the technologist is frustrated because nobody's using the great system that they built. And the salesperson or the marketeer is frustrated because nobody wants to buy this stuff. Because we didn't think about what value we were trying to layer on top of the product that we were trying to build, which is a fundamental thing that we all know from product design, whether you're technology focused or not technology focused. But it gets lost in these huge, big ICT projects that you see within organizations. So there's one more V. If you're involved in big data, you would have heard of volume. So we're talking about how just the sheer volume of data involved within big data projects means we need technology that can handle this. The velocity of the data generally coming at a speed that is just immensely difficult to deal with. If you're Facebook, the amount of likes that are happening is just mind-blowing. The variety of that data, even within a small business like INM, we're dealing with 20 to 30 different sorts of data, whether it might be the data that we're bringing in from Facebook, whether it's the data that's coming from our registration platform, from our commenting platform, from our live blog system, from our CRM system, from our content management system, and you keep going. And you've got journalist resourcing systems, you've got tools for collaboration and understanding ideas and who's going to be working on which story, where are the photographers. Now all this information is flying in. How do I deal with it? And it's all very, very varied. Validity is a key problem in big data analytics or in big data problems. The data can invalidate itself I can get information from 2 sources, from Facebook and from our registration platform. They may give you 2 different addresses, 2 different telephone numbers. Which one do I trust? These are challenges that need to be solved. And volatility, this data is just, it can be all over the place and can be valid today and not valid tomorrow, and it can become big and can become small, and is very, very volatile in nature. As technologists, if you've got a normal big data presentation, they'd be you'd start with the top 3 V's. Some people would talk about validity, others would talk about volatility. And you went to enough presentations, you'd hear about the 5. Very few people talk about the V in the middle. If you are getting data in from 30 different varied sources, and they're all really, really high velocity, and they're generating a high volume of events that you need to process, before you go out and pick a technology to process all of that information, ask yourself the question, is it valuable for us to collect all of this data? Or could we build a system on a sample of the data? Do we think realistically that Walmart look at every single shopping basket that goes to every single Walmart store every single day in order to understand whether to put beer and nappies beside one another or not? Or do they look at 20% from a wide, a decent, good, representative sample of the data? That can make building the product 1,000,000 times cheaper and can increase the overall value or profitability of that product. Do we need all the data sources that we're integrating? I saw recently an article that said data is really easy to collect and store now. And it is really easy to get. It's cheap to get data storage, whether you get it in the cloud or you buy yourself some cheap hard drives. I wouldn't say it's cheap to integrate. It's very expensive to integrate. It involves getting somebody in your team to spend a few days integrating the data, and then maintaining that integration over time can be exceedingly expensive. Ask the question, do we need this data source? Let's just not include it because it's easy to include. Think about it and think about the value. The number one thing is, if you see one of these projects come in, when somebody says, we're going to monetize our data, we're going to build this thing, be ready to turn around and Keith mentioned it in the last presentation, come back and say, are you sure? You've done the numbers on this? This makes financial sense? Because at the end of the day, we're the gatekeepers that keep people who haven't thought things through away from themselves, of starting 2-year, multi-million-dollar projects that are going to break the bank because we haven't thought through the value of them. I heard, again, recently I heard you can write a blank check if you want to do something with data at the moment. It's like if you were back 3 or 4 years ago and used the word social network in front of a VC, you just get yourself a load of money. Now if you go in and say data, you can go, oh, no, these guys know what they're talking about, let's do it. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to come out with money at the other end in terms of a valuable product. I want to talk just briefly about one of the successes that we've had in the independent. I'm not going to go into it in a huge amount of detail. If you're actually interested in reading about it, there's a blog article on the INM website that goes into it in detail. But this involved us bringing together a number of different roles within the business and getting them to trust data and to accept data and to work with data. And those big roles in this particular context was actually our own dev team who weren't data au fait. So as data scientists, we needed to get the dev team on board first, get them to trust us. Then we needed to work with the design team, and then we needed to work with the editorial team, and then also with the sales team. So lots of people within the business. We identified, the red line here represents the number of, the amount of traffic that we were getting from mobile in, here is May 2014. And we saw in January, between January and April, we saw a 30% increase in the amount of users coming in on mobile. In another graph, we don't see an increase. We see a little increase in terms of the amount of traffic, but we saw this huge spike, 30% improvement in the number of users coming in on mobile, but no movement in the traffic. We were doing all right with mobile. It was doing okay, Nobody was really complaining. There was an organizational gut feeling. Well, that's what mobile's like, isn't it? We do this much on desktop, we do this much on tablet, and we do that much on mobile. That's the way it's meant to be. Yeah. We wanted to challenge that, and we said no. We looked out there at the data we can see from other people out in the market. Our mobile should be better than this. So we took the data, we took the behavioral data of how people used our platform, and we went to the designers and we say, what would you do differently now that you know this about the behavior of our customers? And they tinkered with the design a little bit, and they did some different bits and pieces. And again, that's a really challenging conversation to have with somebody who's in love with their design. I'm in love with this design. I made it. It's my child. I made it. It's my baby. Right, okay? People don't use it the way you thought you were going to use it. Okay. It's not as good as you think it is. Okay. I have to change. I have to adapt, and I have to do something different. So they made the change. We got the dev team to agree to make it. It also had an impact on the sales team because the design had to be monetized differently because it was bespoke for mobile design. And that meant that when they went to market, they now, instead of selling one bundle of targeted advertising across all platforms, they had a different product on desktop and tablet than they had on mobile. So we spent a long time convincing the sales team we had to do this for the experience of the end user, and showed them the data and said to them, in the long run, this will make you more money, but you need to come with us on the journey that will get us there. So we released the new version of the mobile product on the 12th of May. We watched the data, and we got a little uptick. You can see there, we bounced sort of free of tablet. And we said, okay, it's good. We thought we would do better than that. So we took the data and how people used it, and we went back to the designers and said, okay, you had some good stuff, you did well, but we want to do better. And we did it again, and we launched around the beginning of July. We launched another iteration of the mobile product. And we went again in August. And we now find ourselves in a position, and this is up until the end of March 2015, that our mobile traffic has now gone from 18% of our overall traffic to 38% of our overall traffic. That's to the end of March. To the end of May, it's 45%. Mobile continues to run. Not only has our audience gone up in that period there by a factor of 30%, our audience on mobile, a year after, in May 2015, a year after making that initial change, our mobile audience has now doubled. Because the product that we're offering is something that people will want to share with other people. They're saying, you want to see that? It's a good mobile product, like it, let's use it. Interestingly, the insights that we gleaned from this, which was used for our mobile website product, or what we call our mobile adaptive website, we used those insights and new design tweaks and changes that we'd found, and we brought those over onto our mobile app. And we launched that mobile app in the beginning of December 2014. And within 2 months, so by the end of March, we'd tripled the traffic in the app. So we'd gone from tens of millions to really big tens of millions of screen views within the app in a 3-month period. So what we were able to do is to leverage the data that we'd learned from one product into another product and just bootstrap the app team. We actually hired a brand new app team hired new guys into our team, expanded. We've been using an external vendor for all our app development. We decided to bring it in-house to build it ourselves. Brought in a couple of guys, and they started on day one with all of the insights that we'd learned from the mobile adaptive site, and they were to use that to move forward. My last slide, I want to talk about something that we're planning on looking at as we go forward. That is the front page of the Irish Independent from, I don't know when it is, April, something like that, March or April. If you consider if you consider that paper, it's 150 years old, right? There's a lot of organizational resistance to change, as we talked about earlier. And when you talk about a 150-year-old business, there's a huge amount of resistance to change. That is the front page of the paper, and to get that front page of the paper, there's a number of people that have to do a number of jobs. And the expression "hold the front page," when I started, I've been in the Independent for a year, and it happens. They do it. They do hold the front page because the story is coming. Why do they hold the front page, though? What's the key thing about the front page? Well, the front page is the advertisement, right? It's the thing that sits on the stand in the newsagent and says, "Buy me. I've got the thing you want to read about." So what do you do when you go online? You make a front page. You make a home page. A landing page for people to come to, independent.ie. You go there, and I get some stories that happen here, and I get some advertising, and I get some different bits and pieces. Sorry, it's a little bit old slide, so this news isn't current. But the question would be is, why do you have a front page that's for everybody? In this case, I need to have one front page because I've got to send it to the printer, and the printer has to print me 150,000 copies of it, and then I have to distribute it around the country, big distribution issues, and get it all to work. And I get it onto there, and I sell my newspapers. But in this case, we already have a more dynamic page because we have a dedicated digital editorial team that are changing this minute by minute and hour by hour throughout the day. But why do we have a front page that is designed for the masses and not designed for the individual? What we've been doing is we've been building profiles, understanding readers' content interests, what they like to read. And we're currently building out prototypes and running an experiment, which we're going to run with a small trial group in the next couple of weeks, that will look to say, okay, you read sports content, you come to independent.ie, we're not going to get rid of the Irish news or the business news. You know, they're still going to be here. We'll move things around a little bit, but we'll make sure that you get a heavier sports flavour than style flavour. You know, what interest would a sports person necessarily have in Nadia Ford? Just not of interest to that particular person. We found somewhere in the order of, well, with segmentation, it depends on how many segments you go looking for as to how many you find, but we've looked at it at different levels of granularity and found 17 very distinct user profile groupings that we think we can use for targeting. 4 of those have got sports in nature. There's sort of sports and news, people who really read a bit of both. There's the dedicated sports fan who just reads exclusively sport. And then you've got your rugby fan and your soccer fan who don't have that all-round interest in sport, but they read exclusively rugby and exclusively exclusively soccer. We ran that analysis in April when the GAA season wasn't on. So we'll be running that analysis again when the rugby season finishes and the GAA season starts, because of course it's going to change. How are we going to adapt and evolve? How are we going to keep the experience looking appropriate when you move between different segments? I'm going to change the different experience that you're getting. The key thing for us here is, as a technologist, I've built a system similar to this before in telecommunications for personalizing the portals of mobile providers. But when you come to this, it's very easy to say to yourself, oh, we can do that. We've got technology. We can find the right stories. We can be the editors. We can get that content. We can build the page 100% dynamically and make it work. And it'll be brilliant. We had to dial that right the way back because we knew that if we walked into this 150-year-old business where somebody has worked for a long time to work their way through the organization to become the editor in the appropriate section or on the homepage, if you came in and just said, we're taking over, it wouldn't work. That change would be just too big. So we've come at it from the perspective of going to our editorial team and asking them, what experience do you want to provide to this type of person? We had to communicate that, as we talked about earlier. How do I communicate with somebody who who doesn't have the experience of looking at the data, of looking at the persona, of looking at this stuff? We use top trump cards. So we took each of our clusters and we turned them into little top trump cards. And we said, here's a user. They could immediately identify with that person. They understood what it was. They didn't have to see the data. They just saw, yeah, I get that. Little top trump cards, read sport, comes on in the mornings and the evenings, those sorts of little snippets about their behavior, and we use those personas to communicate with them. And what they've done now is provided experiences for a bunch of those groups of users. And I said, okay, great, this is what we want to deliver to them, and now we'll start an iterative process where it comes around. And they're really, really happy to do that because actually it makes their life easier because it's going to take the pressure off them in terms of having to meet their targets. We're going to give the right user the right content, reduce the bounce rate, get people reading more content per session, and really make them happier. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm a little bit early, but I appreciate we've got the AGM to do, and we're running a little late. So, is there any questions? Oh, this is a style one. Any questions? Yes.
I've seen some articles and studies about the United States, and the impression that society there is becoming more fragmented because people stay in their filter bubble. They're getting news stories, advertisements and search results that are based on their previous history, which is reinforcing, they're not encountering conflicting views. And do you see a risk with that?
Absolutely. It is one of the first things that we design for in recommendation systems, but not one of the first things that everybody designs for when they build recommendation systems, especially in a content perspective. If you look at product, and you look at, for example, Amazon, a little bit of overfitting isn't the end of the world. So they tend to use predominantly similarity-based metrics to identify how to build recommendations. I find, right, this is what you've bought, these are items that are similar to what you've bought, therefore I'm going to cast my net moving out slowly from similarity. Whereas in a lot of cases with content, you need to come at it from the other perspective. Well, yeah, I already read an article really similar to that. Why would I want to read one that's identical? Or as you said, I want to cast my net further. I want to get a more diverse opinion. And diversity is then the watchword. So we temper any recommendation or prediction algorithm that we make, not only with similarity, we temper it with diversity and bringing in a variety of content. There are some dedicated strategies as well that can help with that similarity diversity problem. One example, it's called collaborative filtering. What it does is rather than looking at your behavior, it takes your behavior and compares it to other people's behavior. So as long as other people are finding more diverse content, you will find that by proxy, by saying, well, you've read nearly all the same articles as this person, but you haven't read these 3 or 4, and we'll use those as the seed for doing recommendation, and that can enable you to find the great new content that they found. But it is, I agree with you, it's a huge challenge, and one that we're talking to our editorial team about. Anything else?
What analysis do you do on paid portals versus unpaid portals?
The paywall conversation. That is a leading question. I would not be... so I've done a huge amount of analysis on it, is the answer. So it's a question I'm asked about every 4 months. Can we do a paywall? Should we do a paywall? Should we do a paywall? I mean, we all know the Irish Times have introduced one recently. But done in what you call a leaky paywall, so you can get quite a lot out of it before you have to pay, which is an interesting approach. Ireland is a very different model to most of the countries. I lived in Austria for a long time. Most people there would have bought subscriptions to newspapers, would have had them delivered to their house every day of the week. They're used to paying for news. Here we buy news in the shop when we think of it. You know, we might have a ritual, we buy it every morning, but it still feels like I go in and I get it. And we have a notion that content online should be free. That doesn't mean the content of the paper isn't free, because actually if you think about it, the €1 charge that you pay for a newspaper in a shop is just to stop people walking in and picking up 30 newspapers and walking out. It's to give it a notional value. In reality, the value of the newspaper is paid for by the advertising side of it. In the same way that the advertising online pays for the site, pays for independent.ie. So it's an inexorable push everywhere in the publication industry. How do we get more money out of our content? And the logical question is to say, we'll ask people to pay for it. I hope the Irish Times experiment proves it wrong, because I hope it stays free. Personally, as someone who works for a news organisation, I hope it stays free, because I think it adds whole different types of connotations when you start paying for it. You know.
Yeah, but if you don't have the paywall, then your job is to monetize more and more data.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the approach that we're taking, is this notion of value exchange. So to say to people, okay, we want your data. Okay, we want you to socially sign in with us. We get the data. We can use that data to give you a better advertising experience. So we can put you in an anonymized segment. Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. We can put you in an anonymized segment, so you will now get advertising that's less annoying to you, right? So get something that's a little bit more targeted, a little bit more targeted to your experience. In order to get that data from you, you're not going to give it to us for free. We have to provide you with reasons. We call it a reward suite, things that will get you over the line to register with us and share with us. So every feature we're putting on independent.ie for the last number of months has had that in mind. How does this get the user a step closer to feeling there's enough value in this platform to register? And you'll see over the next 6 months, 8 months, more and more of these things coming out to say, okay, we've got a great feature that's going to make your experience on independent.ie much, much better, but you need to be signed in for it. You don't have to pay us anything, but we'll ask you to register.
So,
coming up, and I suppose people like me who they're down their entire
Yeah.
cookie cache.
Cookie deleters, and yeah.
Like, how can you continue to monetize without the actual tracking and trends?
It's interesting. We've seen this happen before in terms of ad blocking technologies came out and everybody said the same thing. It's one of those, we have to be very careful to remember that we're technology people and act very differently to non-technology people. In reality, right now, we see about 4% ad blocking in the traffic that we see coming to the site. That's 4% of users, not even 4% of traffic, actually. So it is very, very low. You're absolutely right. If you go to a position whereby you lose the tracking cookie, you lose the ability to be able to provide personalization or targeting for anonymous users. You then need to move towards a position where you say, okay, well, this only works for people who are actually signed into the platform for whom we have another cookie, another identifier. But yeah, it would be a big challenge if it came up to big numbers, but at the moment it's not. It wouldn't even be close. But good question.
What's your data currently telling you about the printed media versus digital and the lifetime left in printed media?
That's a really dangerous question, one that I probably won't go into too much detail on. Because someone will watch the video for this and I'll just get shot on the way out the doors. No, look, print media. Everybody knows there's trouble in the waters. A number of newspapers have already gone to the wall. Thankfully, The Independent is still number one in terms of circulation in Ireland. We continue to get a bounce every time somebody else goes out of publication, goes out of circulation, somebody else comes in. The big challenge for us is to start to bring the digital revenues up to make up for what will ultimately become a shortfall in print revenues. It's not there yet. Everybody will accept that. It's not there yet. It's harder to monetize in that space. A lot of brands are used to buying a full-page spread in the Irish Independent or the Irish Times, and then moving that to online is a totally different value proposition. And you're also competing in a much wider market because I can now advertise on whatever blog, whatever platform, whatever app, and target particular audiences. And you've got pure plays out there now. You've got Joe and Her and all these great products that are doing different things, which also make the market from a digital perspective much more crowded. We're still doing all right. Let's put it that way. Okay. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
So that is the end of our speakers for today. Thank you for coming. I hope you've got as much out of it as I actually got out of it. I thought the speakers were all excellent. I might be a bit biased, but I thought they were all very good. I hope you had some interesting chats over coffee and over dinner, and hopefully see you all again here next year. But I'll hand you over to Michael, who's going to talk about the AGM and maybe have a wrap-up as well.
Thanks everyone for coming. Special thanks to the ICS. Did a great job. Really appreciate it, lads. Great venue, well hosted, and hope everyone had a good day. We're going to have our thanks to David for a wonderful conference today. We're going to have our AGM now, so people are welcome to stay. You're also welcome to leave if you don't want to be bored by our what we're doing over the last year and stuff. I believe there's drinks afterwards. What's the story? Over in the hotel. So what time is that at? Whenever we finish up the Whenever we finish, we're going to be about half an hour, I'd say, the most. So we can join people over there. People, as I say, are welcome to stay and listen to the AGM. So listen, thanks for attending. I hope you have a good day. I think it was a really varied list of speakers. I really found it interesting. I hope everyone else did. So we'd like to take this on again next year. Maybe do the Eyes of the World so much if we could. Get some international speakers. We were talking to a few options and maybe get some of the Eyes of people from around Europe. So let's try and make this bigger and better again next year. But thanks to everyone, and I hope you have a good day.